Welcome to the History Channel from the Sacred Scripture. Have you ever wondered how much history is hidden in the DNA of the peoples of the Middle East? Much is known about ancient biblical tribes, but do we truly understand their genuine genetic affiliation? In this video, we will delve into the main groups, Famous, Ra'im, Ashkenazim, and others. But we won't stop there. We will also examine the genetic lineage of ancient Arab tribes that still inhabit this region: Ismailites, Esau, Madianites, Ammonites, Moabites. What influence did intermixing over the centuries have on Jews and Arabs? Answers to these questions can be found in genetic studies spanning millennia. Have genetic traits been preserved, or has there been mixing with other peoples? Do scientific findings confirm historical and biblical narratives? Will these discoveries be something unexpected? Get ready for an exciting journey into the mysteries of Jewish and Arab DNA. But before we begin, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything interesting. Archaeological excavations at Tel Beth Marik and Tel Megiddo, mentioned in biblical texts, hold immense significance for archaeological research. Thanks to samples obtained from these sites, we can gain deeper insights into the genetics of ancient Israelites. These samples serve as the basis for studying genetics. From these studies, we know that ancient Israelites were descendants of at least three main genetic groups: Anatolians from the Neolithic era, Iranians from the Neolithic era. The genetic contribution of these populations formed the Semitic DNA, which is characteristic of Arabs, Syrians, Palestinians, and other peoples of the region. These discoveries are of great importance for reconstructing the genetic history of the region, especially in the context of the Bronze Age, which they investigate. We offer you a detailed overview of the formation and evolution of Semitic populations, revealing deep genetic connections between the peoples of the Middle East. Moreover, by studying these genetic groups, we can identify patterns of migration, cultural interactions, and adaptations to the environment, which significantly influence the history of the local population. Thus, places like Tel Beth Marik and Tel Megiddo play a key role in understanding the genetics and history of Semitic ancestors, establishing a link between the past and present of Jewish communities and their neighbors. For a long time, there have been numerous debates and speculations around Ashkenazi Jews, also known as European Jews, particularly regarding their genetic origin and genealogy. One of the most popular but unconfirmed theories claims that Ashkenazi Jews are descendants of the Turks or the Khazar people, a nomadic group that presumably adopted Judaism. However, this idea has been refuted by scientific and historical research. Ancient Israelites mixed with the European population over the centuries, which affected their appearance and genetic characteristics. Despite these external influences, Ashkenazi Jews retain their genetic identity, closely linked to their Jewish origin. The term Ashkenazi comes from Ashkenaz, an ancestor associated with European groups, especially Germans. According to Jewish traditions and records, this name came to denote Jewish communities that arose in Central and Eastern Europe. Today, Ashkenazi Jews constitute a significant portion of the global Jewish population and are one of the main Jewish groups living in Israel. Despite conspiracy theories still occasionally asserting that Ashkenazi Jews are Turks who converted to Judaism rather than being genetically or ethnically Jewish, these claims lack scientific foundation. Recent genetic studies have shown that only about 1.5% of Ashkenazi Jews' DNA can be traced back to Turkish populations. This small genetic contribution does not change their main genetic composition, which is predominantly Semitic and directly related to ancient Israelites. This is a vivid example of the complexity of historical and genetic paths that combine their Jewish origin with the influence of European populations. Let's take a closer look at the ancient Semitic DNA present in Ashkenazi Jews and its connection to ancient Israelites. Genetic studies have shown that on average, Ashkenazi Jews have about 39% ancient Israeli Semitic DNA in their current genetic makeup. However, this percentage may vary among different individuals, reflecting varying degrees of mixed marriages within this population. The main part of Ashkenazi Jews' DNA has European origins, accounting for 57% to 60%. This mixture occurred over centuries, especially during periods when these communities lived in Central and Eastern Europe. On the other hand, the proportion of Semitic Israelite DNA among Ashkenazi Jews is smaller compared to other subgroups. It varies depending on the specific subgroup. For example, German Ashkenazi Jews have between 24% to 14% ancient Israeli DNA, Lithuanian Ashkenazi Jews between 29% to 22%, and Polish Ashkenazi Jews between 27% to 16%. These data indicate that despite significant European contributions, Ashkenazi Jews retain a notable genetic link to the West. Nevertheless, the presence of ancient Jewish Semite DNA in Ashkenazi Jews testifies to their origin and historical connection with ancient Israelites. Over time, mixed marriages reflected the complex path of this group, which managed to adapt and survive in various cultural and geographical conditions without losing their Jewish identity. Thus, despite changes in genetic composition, Ashkenazi Jews remain an integral part of the historical and cultural unity of the Jewish people. Sephardic Jews, the second largest Jewish group, trace their origin directly to ancient Israelites. Sephardim got their name from the Iberian Peninsula, which includes Spain and Portugal. These Jews mainly lived in this region but were also present in parts of the Maghreb such as Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria. Their history and spread reflect rich interaction with Iberian cultures more than Ashkenazi Jews. Approximately 40% to 50% of their genetic makeup comes from the ancient Israeli population, confirming their direct and significant connection to ancient Israelites. They are one of the Jewish groups with the greatest prevalence of Semitic genetics. However, similar to Ashkenazim, Sephardic Jews also demonstrate admixture with other peoples. About 27% of their DNA has Southern European origins, reflecting their long-term interaction with the peoples of the Pyrenean Peninsula and the Mediterranean. Additionally, they carry genetic traces linked to the populations of the Middle East, including Semitic, Berber, and Arab components, which make up 8% to 10% of their DNA. Another interesting aspect of Sephardic genetics is the presence of about 19% DNA related to ancient European populations, indicating admixture with prehistoric European peoples. These genetic traces underscore the complexity and breadth of historical ties of Jews with various regions and cultures. Thanks to the preservation of their genetics, Sephardic Jews rank second, surpassing Ashkenazim, due to less influence from European mixed marriages and greater preservation of Jewish origins. However, thanks to the genetic characteristics of Semites, both groups have a deep connection with ancient Israelites. This is confirmed by genetic studies proving their common origin despite regional and historical differences. Sephardic Jews are a vital link in preserving the genetic and cultural heritage of the Jewish people. Their genetic makeup not only attests to their connection with ancient Israelites but also demonstrates the consequences of centuries-long admixture with European and North African populations. Mixed marriages over time have altered their genetics, but Jews retain their deeply rooted Jewish identity, spiritually and genetically affirming their role as one of the most numerous Jewish communities in history. It is important to note that all this information is based on statistical research and genetic analysis of the modern Jewish population. Now let's talk about Middle Eastern Jews, known as Mizrahi Jews. Their name comes from the Hebrew word Mizrach, meaning east. This group includes Jews who lived in the Middle East outside of Israel, residing in countries such as Assyria, Iraq, Iran, and others. As a Jewish group with the highest proportion of ancient Israeli DNA, Mizrahi Jews and Syrians demonstrate their genetic closeness to ancient Israelites. About 69% of their DNA belongs to ancient Israeli Jews, indicating a direct and significant connection with ancient Jews. Additionally, approximately 18% of them have mixed origins with European populations, significantly less than Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews. Also, 6% of their DNA was found to be Macron, likely resulting from limited interaction with the population of North Africa. Iraqi Mizrahi Jews show even more impressive results. Studies have shown that 85.2% of their DNA indicates that they are the ethnic minority genetically purest among modern Jewish groups. This percentage reflects unique genetic preservation observed in Jewish culture. Communities that remained in the Middle East had fewer contacts with the outside world compared to European Jews. Comparing those who stayed in the Middle East with Ashkenazim and Sephardim, it becomes clear that Mizrahi Jews have the highest proportion of ancient Israeli ancestors. This is largely explained by their lesser admixture with European populations and geographical continuity in the Middle East, the historical cradle of the Jewish people. While Ashkenazim were ethnic minorities in Europe, Mizrahi Jews have always been an integral part of Middle Eastern communities. The average Jew has about 39% ancient Israeli DNA, while Sephardic Jews show 40% to 50% of this DNA. Among Syrian and Iraqi Mizrahi Jews, respectively, 69% and 85.2% have ancient Israeli DNA. These data highlight the important role of Mizrahi Jews as custodians of genetic heritage closest to ancient Israelites. Despite minor influences from other regional population groups such as Europeans and Moors, Mizrahi Jews remain most closely linked to ancient Israelites, reflecting the continuity of history in the Middle East. Although Mizrahi Jews mixed with other groups, especially Europeans and Arabs, their ancient Jewish origin remains predominant among the population. Their numbers exceed other Jewish groups like Ashkenazim and Sephardim. The distinctive features of Mizrahi Jews are crucial for understanding Jewish history and uniqueness, confirming their significance in preserving the Semitic heritage of the Jewish people. Interestingly, the only significant admixture detected in the DNA of Iraqi Mizrahi Jews is related to ancient Persians and Iranians, comprising only 14% of their genetic makeup. Genetic studies show that Iranian Jews, known as Irani, have genetic similarities with Jews from the Bronze Age, making them the closest descendants of ancient Israelites among all Jewish groups. Direct descendants of Israelites, Iranian Mizrahi Jews or those originating from Iran possess about 38% ancient Israeli Semitic DNA. However, due to the historical influence of Persian populations in the region, they have a significant admixture of about 60% DNA of ancient origin. Despite this admixture, their genetic connection with ancient Israelites remains strong. The Jewish groups discussed Ashkenazim, Sephardim, and Mizrahim are related to ancient Israelites but in different proportions. Genetic studies show that along paternal lines, all three groups are closely related to each other through Semitic lineages originating from the Levant. However, analysis along maternal lines shows that Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews have a closer connection with the ancient population of the Middle East, surpassing Ashkenazim. This genetic predominance of the maternal line among Mizrahim and Sephardim indicates the legacy of matriarchal centuries that retained unique traits. This connection is particularly important as it points to tighter preservation of genetic elements. Genetic studies of Mizrahi, Sephardic, and Ashkenazi Jews, originating from Jewish communities of the Levant, provide deep insight into the ancient roots of the Jewish people. Despite differences in the percentage of ancient Israeli Semitic DNA and degree of admixture, all these groups maintain an undeniable genetic connection with ancient Israelites. Each of them carries a piece of this heritage, contributing to the diversity and historical richness of modern Judaism. If you are already familiar with information about the genetics of major Jewish groups or want to learn more, leave your comments. There is much interesting information about the history and genetic peculiarities of each of these groups. Before moving on to the genetics of various Arab tribes, it is important to dispel a widespread misconception among many people about the origin of Arabs. When asked about the ancestors of this people, the most common response is that Arabs exclusively descend from Ishmael. However, when we study historical genealogies and records preserved both by the Arabs themselves and by Jews, we understand that this viewpoint is overly simplistic. Ismail ibn Ibrahim and other figures also gave rise to various Arab tribes such as Esau, Mudun, Ammon, and Moab, known as Yoktan in Arabic and Joktan in Hebrew. All descendants of Shem, including ancient and medieval Arabs, were well aware of these differences in origin. They clearly distinguished between Arabs tracing their lineage from Ishmael and Arabs from southern Arabia. Knowledge of this is essential for anyone wanting to understand the history and identity of the Arab people over the centuries. Another important point to note is the belonging of Arabs to the Semitic racial group. This group also includes Jews, Assyrians, Chaldeans, Arameans, and other peoples of the Middle East such as Ecuadorians. Due to this common origin, Arabs have a genetic kinship with Israelites and Jews, making them not only biologically but also linguistically related peoples. The Arabic language belongs to the same language family as Aramaic, which in turn is related to other Semitic languages in the region. Such linguistic and cultural proximity underscores the historical connection between these peoples over the centuries. The idea that Arabs originate solely from Ishmael does not correspond to historical facts. Even before the appearance of Ishmael, son of Abraham, in the southern Arabian Peninsula, various Arab tribes known as Cottonite Arabs already existed. They were descendants of Cotton, a legendary figure known as the Cottonite Arabs. Surprisingly, medieval Arab genealogists distinguished between descendants of Ishmael and southern Arabian Arabs tracing their lineage from Cotton. This finds its reflection in the Bible in Genesis chapter 10, verses 2 to 6. According to these texts, Aram was the father of Shem, and Shem was the father of Eber. Eber had two sons, one named Peleg, in whose days the earth was divided, and the other named Joktan. Joktan became the father of Almodad, Shalef, Hazarmaveth, Jerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Dikla, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these people were sons of Joktan, from whom the southern Arab tribes, including the Sabaeans, one of the most famous ancient peoples in Arabia, descended. Thus, the presence of Arabs in this region can be traced long before Ishmael. Various sons of Israel became founders of southern Alexandrian tribes. The appearance of famous Adites and Tamid, descendants of Ishmael, son of Abraham, indicates that Arabs trace their origin to Ishmael, who was the father of 12 tribes playing a significant role in forming Arab culture. However, considering the genealogical chronicle, it becomes evident that Arabs trace their origin to Ishmael, son of Abraham. This discovery allows us to conclude that the Adites were not the first but the second largest Arab group. Before their appearance on the historical scene, Arab tribes tracing their lineage from Cotton were already firmly established in Arabia. The diversity of Arab origin becomes even more apparent when examining the variety of Arab tribes. Besides Israelites, other peoples include descendants of Lot, who founded the Moabites and Ammonites. Both these groups are considered Arabs and were formed from children born to Lot from incestuous relations with his daughters after they intoxicated him. This story, described in Genesis 19:30-38, received further development. Additionally, there are 6 Arab tribes tracing their origin from Abraham through his second wife Keturah, Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shuah. The most famous among them is the Midian tribe, whose name became synonymous for all other tribes of this genealogical branch. Finally, Genesis also mentions 14 Arab tribes that, according to verse 15, descended from Esau, son of Isaac. Jacob founded the nation of Edomites, among whose leaders were Taman, Omar, Zepho, Kenaz, Gatam, and Amalek, 14 Edomite clans in total. These records testify to the multifaceted and complex process of the formation of the Arab people, incorporating multiple lineages ascending to various biblical and historical figures. Next, I propose to consider 3 Arab populations from the Middle East whose genetic makeup preserves the legacy of the aforementioned biblical figures. I will start with Jordan and the Jordanian population. For those who do not know, in the Bible, Jordan is mentioned as the land of Edom and the land of Uz, where Job lived. Over centuries and millennia, this region was inhabited by various Semitic peoples, leaving their mark on the modern ethnic composition of Jordanians. Among the first peoples settling in this region were the Ammonites and Moabites, descendants of Semites. Much later, this land was inhabited by 14 Edomite tribes, descendants of Esau. Their genetic trace can still be found in the local Arab population. In more recent times, this region was settled by the Nabateans, a people with significant cultural and economic influence, known for their magnificent city of Petra. The Nabateans were descendants of Nahor, son of Terah, in Arab genealogy. Thus, modern Jordan reflects rich ethnic and historical heritage, uniting the influence of Ammonites, Moabites, and Nabateans. It demonstrates the continuity of Arab presence in the region from biblical times to the present day. Various genetic studies allow us to trace the DNA composition of modern Jordanians. According to these studies, 2% of Jordanians' DNA has Semitic origins, indicating descent from Moabites. Jordanians have about 6.3% ancient Semitic DNA, indicating the genetic heritage of peoples who inhabited this region in the past and continue to live there today. These include Moabites, Ammonites, and Ishmaelite Arabs. They also have more than 73% genetic material inherited from ancestors such as Ishmael and Moabites. Another population of the Middle East with a similar genetic history prefers to be called thus. Therefore, I will use this term. Genetic studies show that 73% of the genetic heritage of modern Palestinians dates back to the Bronze Age, originating from various Semitic peoples who lived in this region. Among these ancestors, Ishmaelite peoples stand out. These data confirm the historical continuity of Semitic populations in the Middle East. Many modern Jordanians and Palestinian Arabs are carriers of the genetic heritage of biblical peoples who lived on these lands thousands of years ago. Many people ask me whether Palestinians or Palestinian Arabs have origins from ancient Philistines. Usually, I answer this question as follows: yes, Palestinian Arabs indeed have a small share of Philistine ancestry. However, this lineage is not predominant in their DNA. Genetic studies show that this line constitutes about 15% of Palestinians' DNA, while the larger part of their genetic makeup is linked to Semitic DNA originating from groups such as Ishmaelite peoples. This is the main part of Semitic genetics known in English as Levantine Neolithic. They prefer to call it the main genetic line of the descendants of Shem, since everyone, including Arabs, ancient Israelites, and other Jewish tribes, carries this lineage in their genetic makeup. Moreover, Palestinians have more than half of their DNA inherited from Semitic groups such as Endites, Ishmaelites, and Elites. Jordanians, in turn, have a genetic makeup mainly derived from Moabites. This strong genetic continuity among Semitic peoples in the region strengthens their kinship ties and origin. The genetic origin of Saudi Arabs presents a fascinating and intriguing study. According to research on Y chromosome diversity in Saudi Arabia and its connections with neighboring regions, 69% to 75% of their ancestors are linked to Indian groups, i.e., the same Semitic peoples forming populations in the region. This is particularly interesting because the Bible confirms the results of genetic analysis. According to the Bible, Abraham had 6 sons from his concubine Keturah, who became the founders of 6 tribes, including the Midianites, who became progenitors of several ancient Arab populations. These tribes lived primarily between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. It is quite possible that part of the population of Saudi Arabia also has ancient genetic heritage connected with Joktan. Thus, tribes such as the Femin, descendants of Joktan, and Ishmaelites of Saudi Arabia constitute a significant proportion, from 6% to 75%, of DNA inherited from these groups. I hope you enjoyed this analysis of genetic links between the Jewish and Arab peoples, as well as with various ancient Arab tribes. May God bless you, and see you soon.